It was agreed to group leaders to take items 15 and 16 together. So that's report 18 of the Assistant Chief Executive and City Engineer, the quarterly report of the Active Travel Programme Office, and report 30, the quarterly report of the Traffic Department. Could I get a proposer and a seconder for those? Councillor Pigeon and Councillor Gilliland.
Sorry, thanks, Lord Mayor. I didn't know whether you're nodding or asking me to speak. I just want to raise a very local issue. We had some terrific work done on the Dodder Greenway in Donnybrook. It's about to open in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. Beautiful work has been done along the side of the IRFU grounds, lovely landscaping, lovely new fence, which is all very welcome. But the residents who've had to put up with the work were promised at the time this work commenced that a new fence would be put up along their road. And I'm asking once again, and I'm fortunate I've had to raise this at nearly every meeting in relation to Dodder Greenway, is this fence going to be installed? Is the promise to the residents going to be honoured? Because I'd hate to see a lovely new scheme being opened in the midst of a big, strong protest by local residents who would feel that the promise made to them has been broken. So is that fence going to be reinstated, the new fence going to be reinstated, so that everybody can enjoy the lovely work that's been done so far? Thank you.
Councillor Michael Pigeon.
Thanks very much. As ever, it's great to see so much work going on. One thing I was just hoping to try and understand, and maybe it's better to tease it out in the SPC, I don't know, but is with some of the projects, you just see kind of works begin, but then nothing happened for long chunks between them. I know it's more of a contractor issue, but with the Kilmainham Shore Road interim scheme, for example, where there's it's kind of, you get these kind of bursts of progress, but sometimes it's on relatively small things like putting down curbs, and then kind of nothing happens for 10 days, and then you get 2 more curbs, and then nothing happens for 10 days. I'm just trying to understand what the process is. Is it that the contractor has lots of different jobs and they just move between them, or what it is? Because I think sometimes it can cause a bit of frustration. Thanks.
Councillor Nisha Unworthy.
I want to raise an issue which was tabled or in the report in December around funding for active travel Ardvera. We seem to all have missed it. Maybe it was because it was December, but I'm just going to quote from the report of the CEO to the December Council meeting. Funding, National NTA funding for 2024 for the Dublin City Council Active Travel Programme is now likely to reduce on the 23 approved amount. The reduction could be in the region of 20%. The Active Travel Office is currently aligning the 2024 Works Programme to match this reduction, etc., etc. I don't know, this is very surprising to me, Ardvera, and I just want to surface it here so councillors are aware. We've only just really, in the last few years, ramped up on our ability to do active travel work, and to be facing into an up to 20% cut in capital funding from the NTA, I think is a real issue. And I would like, Ardvera, that you would write to the NTA and ask them why we are facing, if it's not 20%, how much is it? And why are we facing this at what is a critical juncture in terms of all these projects? Just in relation to I just want to thank the officials for the work on the Griffith Avenue cycleway, and also Haverty Road is mentioned in the report, so looking forward to seeing that in the new year soon, this quarter. And also, just in relation to pedestrian crossings, I keep raising it, we want to be involved in the decisions around allocation and prioritisation of pedestrian crossings in North Central. I know there was a question mark over funding. I'm hoping that that's en route to being resolved, so that we can have that discussion sooner rather than later.
Councillor Claire O'Connor.
Thanks very much, Lord Mayor, and thanks to the Active Travel team for the great work in the South East area. Just a question on the Sandyford to City Centre scheme. The online consultation hub is obviously working very well with nearly 700 submissions made there. The preliminary design, as I understand it, has been completed for the interim scheme, and then another preliminary design was to be completed by the end of December. Is there going to be any crossover between those, or what's the next step? I just wasn't clear on that. And the other thing I wasn't clear on was notwithstanding that the public consultation seems to be over, there's further consultation ongoing, and what's the nature of that? Thanks.
Margaret, Manager.
Thanks indeed, Lord Mayor. Councillor Lacey, we have got confirmation only in the last couple of days that the NTA are not in a position to fund that particular fence. That doesn't mean we're going to give up. I have to now look at other possible routes, sources of income, and I agree that it is disappointing, but we will continue. I know there was commentary made back along about who did what and who should do what, etc., etc. But we have to justify the public value for everything that's funded.
Is in the decision made by this council?
Kamal.
Okay, and all I can say is that I will bring this to other possible sources of income, and I'll talk to the areas in this respect. Councillor Pigeon, yeah, I suppose it does appear sometimes that works can kind of peak and trough a little at the beginning, in particular, until the contractors get their, I suppose, team established and a bit more cohesion in place, and that possibly happens. However, it's they are often doing other enabling works that mightn't have such a kind of a clear presence on the ground. It's difficult to get contractors, obviously, and adequate numbers of staff at the get-go. So I think we're doing quite well overall, considering the proliferation of projects throughout the city. Councillor O'Murray, yes, indeed, we've only got indications yet on a draft basis of funding for next year. It's not finally confirmed, but I don't think we're unique in this local authority in that there will be a reduction on last year's funding. So it's disappointing. However, it doesn't mean we don't keep going back and pursuing throughout the year, which we did last year, for additional funding. And the key thing as well is that, okay, we're building momentum on the contractor, on the actual construction front. We're also ensuring capacity is being developed on the design front, and that's where we're doing a lot of, I suppose, kind of behind the scenes work at the moment. Building our team is building well. The design people have come together, so we'll have a lot of green shovel ready projects always at hand if additional funds become available through the annual revenue, or the annual source, or indeed maybe some of the rainy day funds which were mentioned in the budget, which might be coming on stream in 18 months or 2 years. So we'll be good to go then. We won't be left wanting. Sandyford to City Centre, Councillor Connor, yes, again, the reduced funding has essentially delayed our pushing ahead with the interim scheme on that particular project. We are continuing to go through the process on the permanent scheme, and that hasn't changed. Again, as I said, our system is set up so that we're able to take some shocks on an annual basis to the finances. So one way or the other, I suppose the delays or reduced funding pushes back schemes rather than abandons schemes as such. There are the questions so far, Lord Mayor.
Yeah, so just on the pedestrian crossing. So at the moment, we're still unsure of funding. Last year we managed to receive funding of about 6 million from the NTA and undertook about 17 crossings. The early indication at the moment from the draft allocations is that our allocation will be about 1.4 million this year. So that works out roughly about a pedestrian crossing per area. So there is some funding, though, DCC funding, which we're in discussion with finance just to get allocated. So we're hopeful that we'll have a little bit of a better programme than that. But at the moment, what we're doing is we're looking at how to prioritise that in terms of cost and so on. And as we said, we'll come back to the area committees and let you know once we've got a clear indication of what the work programme looks like.
Margaret. Councillor Damien O'Farrell.
Thanks very much. Listen, thanks very much, Manager, for that information. That's a drastic reduction in funds regarding the pedestrian crossing. They're probably the singular most biggest issue around the area now for councillors and everything. It's a lot of it's to do with the success of the active travel programme, getting people out, and so that's one thing. And just the question, I suppose, is do you know why it's been reduced so much? Is there a reason for that? Is it political? Is there anything we could do, or what's the reason? And the other question I want to ask is that we had a workshop there before Christmas, or a few months ago now, regarding safety for pedestrians on our footpaths, and we're getting out an education programme and all that. Can you tell me where that is at the moment, as far as being rolled out? Thank you.
Councillor Donna Cooney.
Yeah, in terms of the funding, I think we raised that before, and I can't understand, considering that we've been given it in the budget, that like the NTA have been given the budget for active transport and sustainable transport. We know that there wasn't any reduction this year, so why is there a reduction coming to Dublin City Council? Is there a particular reason the NTA? We should be able to know that we can work on projects and follow them through to a high level of design. If some local authorities are not spending their money, then that's their issues. Let us get ahead and do what we can, and use up that budget as much as possible. Just specific questions was about the at the Clontarf paths, there's pedestrian crossings are to go in there, and they said they're to be imminent, that the design has been done. But they were to tie in with the reconfiguration of the cycleway there, which is with the active travel. So as are Brendan and Andy speaking on that, because there's been a delay in that, they're still not doing anything, that the land hasn't, there's been an issue around the land and the title and everything, so that hasn't happened on that. The neighbourhood plans are still in there, and yet we know that there isn't any funding for that. Haverty, the only reason that the one in Marino happened was because we got money from the discretionary funding and something from some of the active travel there to put that in relation to the Clontarf to city centre route, because there isn't anything for the neighbourhood plans. So even though we decided on these neighbourhood plans, can we do anything about that? And
Councillor Trish Rowe.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the report. And just to compliment the Active Travel Office on the breadth and diversity of the projects that are being undertaken. I often wonder how they juggle so many plates in the air, and it's great to see. Good to see progression of the Santry Greenway, and that the fact that it will be going out of public consultation. I hope that keeps moving on swiftly. I just want to ask about the continuation of the cycle lane on Collins Avenue. It's part of the Finglas to Colester cycleway route, and I'm particularly concerned that it stops just before St Aidan's CBS, and a lot of schoolgoers are cycling to school now, and it's really important to kind of continue the cycle lanes on around school areas, whereas this has just stopped before it. And my question really is, when is it going to be continued on to the junction with Swords Road? And I saw in a reply to another question that I put in to the Chief Executive that there's something about 2025, and I just really urge the Active Travel Office to try and bring this forward. And I really don't understand how come when you start a particular project, then that it stops kind of halfway along a roadway. And are you taking traffic questions as well with this? Are you taking the two together?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, just a quick one on traffic, and that is, see the Drumcondra Swords Road has gone to a 24-hour bus lane, and I just wondered how, or in future, will you be giving notices to
Trish.
Okay, there's no notice.
And just on this round, final speaker, Councillor Sophie Nicolau.
Thank you. I was wondering to address the lack of action in Drimna, which is in the 5%, that it's not being addressed by the active travel. How can we bring a scheme or a pilot project for single one-way streets? Single-way streets there would solve a lot of the issues. A lot of residents have contacted the council and actually proposed some of the streets or roads to become one-way streets. So what would it take, and would that be possible? When what do we lack to do it right now, and what would it take to do it? Thank you.
Manager.
Thanks, Lord Mayor, and I'll defer to Brendan in a minute with the other questions. I suppose when it comes to funding being reduced, and again, as I said, we're not unique in this local authority. I'd refer you, I suppose, to maybe pursue the NTA and the department and others in that regard. I suspect, inflation that has crippled a lot of projects over the last while is not is one of the possible reasoning. But we have to work with what we're given. Also, then we're finishing the design brief with the consultants as a result of the outcome of that workshop, councillor, on the safety campaign. So that'll be coming back in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Councillor Cooney, again, referred to the reduction in funding. I would also say that we've come to a very high level very quickly in terms of the funding we've got accustomed to in DCC, being approved 50 million last year and actually securing 60 by the end of the year. So it's, I suppose it's relative. Of course, and I'll refer to Brendan in a minute, we're liaising all the time with Brendan. We have regular engagement on the feasibility and the interconnectivity of all of our various projects. Thank you, Councillor Rowe, for those comments. And in terms of St. Aidan's, Brendan might have something to comment on that particular one. And I'll have to come back to you on the Drimna one, because we're looking at that in particular because, as you indicate, it's perceived, not necessarily the case, but it's perceived to be a little bit behind some of the other areas. But all of these routes lead to everywhere eventually. Thanks, Lord Mayor.
Yeah, I suppose just coming back on a number of items regarding the pedestrian crossings, I suppose one of the items to say is the 6 million that we got last year was considerably up from the previous year, and it was a result of us, making quite a case to the NTA that we had a significant backlog of pedestrian crossings, which had been gone through the tag system, been approved, but which we didn't have the funding to do. So, our initial hope had been that this year we would actually get more. To be honest, that's not the case. So, but I suppose in fairness to the NTA, there was a special push last year to actually up the amount of money that we get for pedestrian crossings. So again, as I say, we're looking to see how we can still put together a significant program on that. Regarding neighbourhood plans, we have been doing a number of neighbourhood schemes. I mean, they're funded out of the DCC funding for the area committees. Again, we're looking at an increase in that. So again, there is a number of area schemes that we'll be able to do. With regard to St. Aidan's, I suppose that was a scheme that Traffic, I suppose, had started the part of the Finglas to Gloucester when Active Travel were formed. Then that was handed over to the Active Travel project team to do. So at the moment, I think what we're looking at is there anything interim we can do just before the Active Travel scheme comes into play. So we'll have a look at that. In terms of the Drumcondra to Swords and the bus lane hours, these went through the normal tag process and were notified to the councillors at the area committee, and it's very much in line with as the public transport, as the routes become 24 hours, and as we see those increase in bus services. And I think a lot of us would have seen the comments there that the PSO, the normal bus service in Dublin, the actual passenger numbers have substantially increased. And again, this is really to try and ease the public transport use in the area.
Councillor Alison Gillinan.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thanks for the report. With regard to the counting of the traffic on the report and also the cyclists, we're still mentioning pre-COVID, and to me it sort of indicates that we want to get the levels back up to where they were before COVID. Yet our overall intention, as stated, is that we reduce the number of cars coming into the city and we increase the cyclists. So I'm just wondering, is there another way of sort of expressing that so it's more in line with what we want to do? And secondly, on counting, I know we take the count, but I really do think, and I've raised this before, that we need a qualitative assessment, particularly of cars coming into the city. Why are they coming in? Why aren't they using public transport? So we have a greater idea of the reason that people are using cars, because I think that's essential to our planning. Two other questions: the safe routes to school and our Dublin City Council school zones. I'm really disappointed that we're prioritising what the NTA and the safe routes to school, because they seem to have piggybacked on what we were doing, and we still have schools on that school zone list waiting. Where are we at with cameras on traffic lights for violations? I think that's something that would overnight, well, at least within a month, change driver behaviour, particularly with regard to red lights. And this last one is zebra crossings. I note one, but if we had the traffic lights, we could have more.
Thanks. I'll pick up where Alison left off there on the pedestrian crossings. If we do see a reduction in budget, we know we can deliver zebra crossings a lot cheaper than we can fully signalised ones. We have one in Sandymount now. We had 10 that we provisionally agreed. Where are we at with pushing ahead with them? How many more we see rolled out? And it has been far too slow to get to this point. So how are we going to accelerate that process? Because we can do a lot more to make our junctions safe if we will use zebra crossings as an alternative to signalised crossings where appropriate around the city. On the budget as well, I just wanted to ask about if we have a breakdown of the spend for 2023 and if they'll be presented to the next SPC. I think it's really important that we interrogate how the money has been spent, that we have been allocated, and that we look at where, if there is any issues where we are spending and not getting a proper return on what the money is that is there, because that's something I think I've been, that we definitely see some schemes that are not delivering on the level of quality that we want. Certainly at junctions, people are still experiencing a lot of conflict, and there's just remains a horribly high level of injury and in some awful cases death on our streets. And we need to be looking at how we can really make safe the where the danger is, which is the junctions, and not just make safe the places that are the easiest. And then the final thing was just on footpaths, and will we see an increase in footpath allocation this year? And will they be incorporated into the active travel schemes as well? Because we're not getting enough value out of our
Councillor Keith
footpath spend.
Connolly.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thanks to both managers for reports. Just in relation to the Finglas Roundabout scheme, funding was secured in 2020. We had a month of public consultation on the DCC portal in 2020, and yet we're back to preliminary design for two of the roundabouts. Doesn't make sense to me. I understand there are alterations needed because of the Finglas Lewis, but it's just taken so long. I think this was first touted in 2009. They're two lethal roundabouts with constant accidents. So I'd just like an update and explanation in relation to how it's taken so long, and we're going backwards rather than forwards. I also wonder if there's any update on the Finglas Lewis. I know it's expected to go to planning this quarter, but the head of it actually has gone on elsewhere. But maybe Brandon or Andy could update us on that. And then the last point is around 24-hour bus corridors. You briefly mentioned those, but is there any indication from on board Penola or the Bus Connects team in relation to when they're going to approve some of the core bus corridors, which can also alterate parts of our city? I know there's big changes planned, for example, to the Griffith Avenue, mess of a junction, if it's given the go-ahead, the Ballymun, the city centre one. So is there any indication from on board or the Bus Connects team in relation to when they might be approved?
Durv Mahagut, Councillor Ray McAdam.
Thanks very much, Lord Mayor. Could I just ask Andy, now that the NTA has stepped in and confirmed that the bus stops along North Strand Road, previously thought lost, will actually be reinstated, do we have a time frame as to when those bus stops will now be in place and effectively overturning a decision that was taken by certain councillors during the planning process a number of years back? In terms then of the transport study, and the report on page 215 talks about the final version of the report being published next month. And has a decision been taken on what projects are going to be advanced this year? If so, which projects are being considered? And has a pot of money been set aside for those works in 2024? Thanks, Lord Mayor.
Gurmagat. Deirdre Heaney.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. In relation to the cycleway on Griffith Avenue in Drumcondra, Lord Mayor, is the greening of that cycleway completed? I was of the understanding that there was going to be much more greening put to differentiate between the actual cycleway and the road space. On page 205 of the active travel report at item 6.21, the Sutton to Sandycove cycleway you mentioned Clontarf Baths acquisition matters and other design assessments are being progressed. Can you be more specific and tell me what exactly is happening there? And last but not least, in relation to the traffic signals, which has been referred to by Damien and Nisha, and the response from the manager is, I think we're going to get one per area, which means we're going to get 5 pedestrian traffic signals across the City Council, Lord Mayor. Why is there such a problem in getting funding? It just doesn't, it seems to be a hugely at variance with the amount of funding for the active travel budget. So I wonder if Richard Shakespeare can throw any light onto this issue in terms of his vision for the city, because we certainly do, Chief Executive, need more pedestrian crossings, as a previous speaker has said. As a result of our active travel projects, more people are out walking and we need them. Thanks, Lord Mayor.
Gormagot, and on Cointure Dernock in this round, Councillor James Gagan.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Again, my questions relate to the pedestrian crossings. The first thing to say is how well that programme has been delivered by Dublin City Council and by your team, Brandon. So I think it's very hard for us as councillors to understand, you know, that some person, unnamed person that you're communicating with in the NTA gives you 6 million this year. You say you made a big case for that 6 million to get it this year. You made an even better case, it sounds like, for more projects next year. And then Santa Claus tells you you're only getting €1 million. So, like, I think, can you circulate to councillors, the sort of, the plan that you sent to the NTA? Presumably you indicated pedestrian crossings that you were looking at, or in general terms, the amount of pedestrian crossings that are still outstanding to the NTA. And maybe just circulate a report to explain to councillors, you know, like how can it be this dysfunctional when we're trying to deliver active travel in the city, that pedestrians are effectively being thrown to the wayside by some arbitrary decision maker to whom we in this council can have absolutely no accountability over. And I hope you could come back to us on that. Thanks.
Manager.
Yeah, so if I come back on a couple of items, so Councillor Gilliland, I suppose when we're presenting it, it's not that we're trying to get the levels of traffic back up to COVID. In point of fact, what we're trying to actually show is the fact that we've actually quite succeeded in not doing that. And we're virtually unique among European cities in that we've got a reduction in car traffic over pre-COVID, and we've got an increase in public transport use. So I suppose it's difficult for us to put it a different way. We can drop that, but I suppose it's a reflection of the changes that happened in the city over COVID, and the fact that those changes still have resulted, and the other changes to do with, you know, working from home and so on, have certainly changed the city and the city numbers. So that's the only reason we do that. In regard to the cycling figures, it's fairly straightforward. The cycling figures are not back up to COVID, so, and that is a target, definitely, to get those numbers up to COVID and beyond. So that's why we keep on doing that. The qualitative assessment, the reason why people are coming into the city, that's an interesting one. I suppose one of the things we do with that is we work with the NTA on the Eastern regional model. So say, for example, on the city centre transport plan, we've done quite a lot of modelling work with the NTA on where people were going, where they were, you know, what their origin, what their destination, and try and use that information. And it kind of percolates to the report and the number of people just driving through the city centre. I guess with regard to the schools and safe zones and school zones and so on, you know, there was a list of schools that the NTA were funding as kind of list 1 and list 2, and we're working our way through those and making good progress in that. I suppose what we're also doing, because we do get the frustration of a lot of schools, and you're quite right, like we'd started off this whole program, we had 110 schools, we did 60 of the schools, we had 50 left to do, and then a lot of those schools are not on these lists. So one of the things we're going to be doing over the next while is going to the various different area offices and actually seeing is there any discretionary funding which can be allocated, and we're quite happy to then do some of that work. But you know, we do have, by the way, we do have, well, no, we do have quite an amount of funding from the NTA regarding the numbers on the list. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to we're trying to see if we can supplement that. Regarding Councillor Horner, zebra crossings, yes, you know, hopefully in the works programme for 2024 we will be looking to have more zebra crossings. In terms of breakdown on the spend in 23, that can be an item for the next SPC in February, so we'll put that down. I agree with you regarding the working on junctions and how necessary it is to do a lot of work on those. So I suppose one of the items that we have been progressing with the NTA, and we're hoping to get some news on that, is we are looking to, particularly on the big junctions on the Bus Connects corridors, as permissions come out from Bord Pleanála, we're hoping that we can get permission to do some of those junctions, some of those pedestrian improvements in the junctions in advance of the main works. So it is something that we're very much conscious of. Just one or two of the other ones, Finglas Lewis, I'm not at the moment up to date with that particular one, so we can ask TII to give you an update on that. Regarding the Bus Connects corridors, the first one has come out of planning just before Christmas. The Liffey Valley one was approved. So I think we're all hoping that we'll start to see a flurry of them coming out. And just Councillor McAdam mentioned about the transport, city centre transport plan. So it's intended, as I said, to bring that back to the SPC. We had a really good consultation, about 3,500 submissions, 80% of them in favour. We had set out in the draft plan an implementation programme for 24, 25 and so on, and we'll be firming up on that in the final version, so we'll have that in about a month's time. And I think the rest of the was with Andy. Sorry, just Councillor Gagan had asked about the pedestrian crossings. So what we might do is if you're okay with it, Councillor, it's an item that we can put for discussion at the SPC, which is on the 7th of February, and we'll bring a more clearer report, I suppose. And the other item, I suppose we should say, as Andy mentioned, you know, what we've got is the draft allocations from the NTA. They're not the final allocations, so we can't. They're not. You know, what we're hoping is that between now and the final allocation, which should be relatively soon, that there may be some increase in funding, but we don't have anything. So if you're okay, we'll do something for the February SPC.
Sorry, through the chair, the question I asked about, oh sorry, the cameras.
Sorry, Councillor, yeah. So traffic cameras, so there has been a working group on how to progress camera-based enforcement, and we've been taking part in that. That is due to make its final recommendations to the department, but in essence it is to try and progress the camera-based enforcement. We're going to be looking at doing some trialling of camera-based, not necessarily enforcement, but camera-based technology to actually start to get used to the technology, I suppose, and also to start to document what the issues are in a number of locations, in the hope then that as the camera-based enforcement, you know, going through the whole legal process comes in space, that we're actually prepared for it.
Thanks indeed, Brendan and Lord Mayor. I forgot to answer Councillor Rose, one of Councillor Rose's questions in regard to Finglas to Killester as well, where the appointment of the consultant for that project is in the first quarter of this year. Councillor Connolly, in terms of Finglas roundabouts, they're in fact very much back on track at the moment and being progressed. We're awaiting approval to proceed to detailed design and the tender for McKee Avenue and St. Margaret's Road, Little Junction. In terms of Jamestown Road, around about the appraisals and business cases have been submitted, and the AA and EIA reports have been completed, and we're working with Fingal in order to fulfil the requirements of the Section 85 agreement. So they're progressing quite well and will form part of this year's and next year's, later this year's and hopefully next year's programme. also, Councillor McAdam, in terms of the bus stops, the construction schedule has not been finalised in terms of those bus stops on the Clontarf Road. There's a lot of planning at this stage still to ensure that they're coordinated with the contractor, and negotiation indeed has to be carried out. We're just dotting the I's and crossing the T's on the Clontarf Baths as well, in terms of the design and the ownership of lands, etc., conveyancing matters. So that is also likely to bear fruit in terms of allowing us to proceed to works there, all being well, probably in the mid to autumn of this year. I think I've covered those questions. Correct me if I'm wrong, and if there's anything inadequately covered in your view, come back to us over the next short while.
Greening of the cycleway on Griffith Avenue.
Greening of the cycle. Was that Griffith Avenue?
Yeah, so I suppose where we are at the moment with the Griffith Avenue is the interim scheme is complete. I'll check and see if there's more works to be done on it. But I suppose for now, I'm not clear that there is much more to be done. But I'll come back to you, Councillor, and once I've had a chat with the project.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Gura Margaret. Councillor Larry O'Toole.
Thank you, thank you, Lord Mayor. I just want to go back again, Andy, to the bus stops. When I read a report there, it's not on the Clár here, but I went into the website. It gave an indication of where we were with the bus stops. The one I was reading had 8 bus stops, 4 on the inward bound and 4 on the outward bound, and it said removed. Now, are they the ones we're speaking about putting back in, or are they removed? I don't want to go through the whole exact details here. I can if you want, but there are four on the inbound from Clontarf Dart Station into Conley Station, and 3 or 4, I'm not sure which, 3 or 4 on the outbound up to the end of the Malahide Road. Now, if it's the case that they've been removed permanently, I think it's going to cause a lot of hardship to residents, especially there's an older population along there also. I think it would leave severe gaps, because in one case, two stops, one after the other, are on the removal list. Now, can you clarify whether those that I see down for removed, it didn't say removed and they will be reinstalled. Can you just clarify for me if it's the case that they're permanently removed? If so, I think it would
Gura
be
Margaret Larry.
a mistake.
Councillor Claiborne.
Apologies, Lord Mayor. Thank you. Just a couple of comments and questions on both reports. Just in relation to the Grand Canal extension, 2 things. You mentioned that there'll be upgrades to the Charlemont Bridge, and I was just wondering, this is something that I raised at area committee level before, can you put coloured road markings where the pedestrian crossing and the cycle lane are across the bridge to stop cars from moving in and parking across them, which makes it really dangerous? Are we confident we'll have a consultant for the extension in place in January? Just on the Dodder Greenway, are those reports that are due in Q1 2024, is that a hard deadline that's likely to be met? Just on Fitzwilliam Street, I see funding is unavailable. I appreciate this is a significant scheme in a conservation area, and it'll have much needed junctions upgrade, particularly at Hollow Street. But the 10 million for 1 kilometre does seem excessive, and I'm just wondering what happened to previous funding that was allocated for this, and what's the plan now? Like, I feel like Hollow Street will end up in Elm Park before that junction is upgraded. Are you going to go back and try and get it done for cheaper? I know you have a great team in place, and more than like so much more has happened than it has done in years, but we still have 25 active travel schemes in early and planning design stages, or waiting for consultants to be appointed, or waiting on public reports and consultations. In that breakdown that you mentioned, can we find out how much goes on design, external consultants versus the actual delivery of the schemes, and what happens to the money that's not spent from the previous year? Does it roll over, or what happens? Like, just one very small example off the top of my head was 200k this year for Suffolk Street, but I haven't seen any changes. Thank you.
Margaret. Councillor Declan
When we have our report on climate and carbon emissions and we see that the transport sector, the emissions are increasing, it's unbelievable that the NTA would cut our funding, and I think that needs to be addressed very clearly. Can we get an update on Royal Canal Greenway Phase 4 from Crossguns Bridge out to Ashtown? I think that there's a lot of local concerns and there's a lot of inconsistencies with this. We've got Phase 3 with a safe, segregated footpath and cycleway, and we've got Phase 4 where pedestrians are supposed to walk alongside e-bikes going 40 kilometres an hour, which doesn't make sense. And locals have other concerns as well. So can we get an update on that? And finally, I just think there's lots of issues around the bus stops, and I think it's time for the NTA to give back control to local councillors and local communities, and we should be able to make decisions, and we shouldn't have consultants doing this top-down approach where they have this theoretical idea, then they run away while it runs through planning, and we're trying to figure out where our buses are. And I just think that the whole thing needs to be dealt with in a more local level, and we should have a lot more input, because if we want people to use public transport, we should actually be able to feed into the quality of that public transport. Thank you.
Margaret. Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, looking at the report, is disproportionate to the east, along the coast from Clontarf to Sandymount, the city centre. It should really be active travel for those who live in those areas, because there's very little mention of any of the areas to the west of the city. No mention whatsoever of Kimmage, Crumlin, Drimna, Ballyfermot, any of those areas. So I think this needs to be re-looked at from the point of view of ensuring that transport for people living in the in what are effectively the inner suburbs is made easy, is made safe, but we haven't addressed that here. And it's one thing to refer to neighbourhood schemes, but neighbourhood schemes in themselves is minor. We need to look at those major routes into the city from the areas that I have described, and some other parts of the north west of the city as well. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Catherine Stocker.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Sorry, just trouble finding the buttons. The report is very comprehensive, and as Patricia Rowe has said, the number of projects being undertaken is very impressive. However, having said that, and some of these concerns reflect previous concerns from others, but I do think it's worth emphasising and adding to those. Regarding the NTA funding cuts, both in terms of active travel and the pedestrian crossings, which to my mind and that of fellow councillors seem absolutely insane, frankly, in our capital city in the context of climate crisis, I would ask that we write to the Minister and the NTA and ask them to meet or do a workshop with the Transport and Traffic SPC, the Lord Mayor and relevant DCC staff, so they can see where we're at with this. The school zones, what's happened here is that the Department of Transport and the Minister have come in on top of something we were doing well and completely overridden local knowledge and say there's one in our area. Well, there are many, but there's one in particular in my area around St. Bridget's, Gloucester, that is absolutely crying out for a school zone, instead of which schools that are less troublesome in those terms have been prioritised. And I think that's really problematic, and I don't think that should be put back to our discretionary funding, which is limited enough as is in terms of delivering for our communities. And I would like the manager to make a comment on the introduction potential for low traffic neighbourhoods, which is something we talk about in the development plan, but we haven't really scoped out in terms of approaching, and I think it is something we should start looking at. Thank you.
Councillor Christy Burke.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Could I ask the manager, there was a meeting with an engineer and staff at the Larkin Centre on North Strand Road and Stafford's Funeral Home, and the aim of the meeting was that they were looking for 2 car spaces outside of the creche and the funeral home, because they had 4 or 5. They were taken away due to the bus and cycle lane. And now we're told that there will be no set down for 2 car spaces. Could the manager confirm? Could I also ask the manager, Lord Mayor, in relation to sections of the small poles on the road on Griffith Avenue, visibility is very, very poor. Did you ever think of illuminating them a little bit more than what they are, particularly the small black ones? Because they are dangerous, both for cyclists and motorists on dark evenings. Thank you.
Manager.
Thanks indeed, Lord Mayor. So, a couple of questions there. I can go through and I can reissue the report, Councillor O'Toole, just on the previous bus stop analysis and justification, and indeed the review of that. But to answer your question briefly, there's one inbound bus stop being created at Stranville and one outbound under the railway bridge, and as I said, we can give you further information on the rationale and the additional support we've got from the NTA on the additional bus stops. Councillor, yes, monies, I suppose, it's not a question of monies being returned. They're usually reallocated. If we don't manage to spend, we're always robbing Peter to pay Paul as such. So they never go back. In terms of the question on the Dodder, Councillor Byrne as well, the public consultation reports will be published on the Active Travel webpage in Q1 following planning determinations. The Royal Canal 4, that's due to referral made, which we indicated in reports made by a third party to Onboard Penala on the Part 8 application. We have to go through due process, and that will be the end of February before we'll be able to revisit this particular project. Councillor Pat Dunn, in terms of disproportionate balancing, we do try our best to, you know, this is a network after all, 300 kilometres, we're doing 200, Bus Connects is doing 100, you know, it's all connecting. It's just that we have to kind of establish, you know, the priority list sometimes and how we get to that from an engineering perspective. And the ease of engineering sometimes encourages us to go to one area to get the project done faster. There are constraints in certain areas that we have to work through before we actually appoint contractors. So we are doing our best to distribute the programme as much as possible, but it will all connect in the end. Councillor Stocker's questions are for Brendan in traffic, and also the question on Griffin Avenue. I suspect, Brendan, I'll have to come back to you on the specifics, Councillor Burke, on the 2 spaces at Larkin. I know there was an engagement there before Christmas. I just didn't get an update in advance of tonight. I think I've covered the questions relevant to active travel.
Yeah, so Councillor Stocker, so regarding the school zones, as I said, we do have funding from the NTA for specific ones which you know, we are working on. We do want to do some of the other ones as well, and if we can find some funding to do those, we will do those as well. Regarding the low traffic neighbourhoods, I suppose we have several different examples of those, which would really be the areas like Walsh Road, like Grange Gorman, where with the filtered permeability in them, you know, low traffic neighbourhoods, I suppose, got some sort of bad press in the UK, but in actual fact, they've been part of our traffic calming schemes for the last 20 or 30 years, and there's many examples around the city. So it is something that we're progressing and want to do more of. Regarding Councillor Burke, I suppose Griffith Avenue, one of our main problems in Griffith Avenue was the leaf falls. So we had to put small poles in to allow the big sweepers to come in and actually clear some of the leaves there. Some of that causes damage to those small poles. So we'll look to get some of the reflectivity and so on put back into Griffith Avenue. So we'll take that one.
Colleagues, it's just after, it's 12 minutes past 9. Normally we'd go straight to emergency motions now. I've allowed an emergency motion from Ray McAdam. What we might do is we only have 17, 18 and then the breviate, so we'll be able to take the breviate.
Can you write to the NTA as was agreed, just to be clear that you're going to write to the NTA?
Well, I'm not sure, was it agreed by council? It was suggested by you,
well,
Nisha.
can I suggest?
Is that
Can we get
agreed?
It's
There
agreed.
we
Yeah,
go.
Lord Mayor.
Okay.
I've already written to the NTA as well.
Okay, guys, I'm just going to allocate now just a couple of minutes, as I said, for items 17, 18, and to take the breviates, if that's okay. All right, Gurmila Milamagi, item 17.
Item 17, report 07 of the Head of Finance, the monthly local fund statement. Could I get a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Flanagan and Councillor Jackson. Is that noted?
Noted. Yeah.
Report number 8 of the Chief Executive, the monthly management report.